Liora, the daughter of the most powerful alien queen in the galaxy, has never spoken a word. In a world where silence is her prison, she watches the stars in solitude, dreaming of a life beyond the walls of her mother's mansion. But when Elias, a humble human janitor, asks her a simple question, everything changes. For the first time in years, Liora answers, and the galaxy will never be the same. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If stories like this captivate you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. In the heart of a sprawling mansion, nestled high above the alien city's glistening skyline, Liora sat by the window, gazing out into the vastness of space. The stars twinkled like distant memories, their light flickering through the blue-hued glass. Despite the opulence surrounding her, crystal chandeliers, alien sculptures, and an endless array of technology, Liora was untouched by it all. Her world was silent. No one dared disturb the daughter of the mighty Queen Nyx, who ruled the galaxy with a cold, calculating hand. But Liora's silence was not a mark of nobility. It was a prison. Her lips had never formed a single word, and the thought of speaking terrified her. The whispers around the mansion claimed that she was cursed, that something inside her was too dangerous to be let loose. But Liora never questioned the stories. She was too young, too isolated. She watched the world around her in a quiet sadness, aware of the bustling life that moved on without her. Servants glided through the halls, their motions fluid and practiced, while the queen held court with her high-ranking delegates from distant worlds. Yet Liora remained apart, shielded from all but the hum of the mansion's automated systems and the occasional distant laughter that rang from the corridors. But on this particular day, something felt different. A shift hung in the air, though she couldn't place its origin. It wasn't until Elias, the human janitor, walked past the door, his mop in hand, that Liora's gaze snapped toward him. She had seen him before, of course, always cleaning, always silent, always unseen. Yet today, his presence caught her attention in a way it never had before. Elias paused as he spotted Liora's reflection in the glass. He didn't say a word, but his eyes met hers. There was something in his expression, a simple curiosity that made her wonder. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. There was no fear in his gaze, only a soft understanding. Liora's heart raced, and for the first time, she wanted to speak. Not for him, but for herself. She wanted to ask why she felt so different, why the silence was suffocating her. But the words stayed locked in her throat. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Silence is strength. Silence is control. The lessons drilled into her since childhood warned her that speaking was weakness. But in that moment, as Elias continued on his way, Liora felt something stir within her, a longing for connection, for a voice that had been silenced for too long. Elias had never expected much from his job as a janitor in the Queen's grand mansion. His world was a quiet one, filled with the hum of cleaning bots, the scrape of a broom, and the endless monotony of polished floors. He never got involved with the alien dignitaries or the extravagant happenings within the mansion. To them, he was invisible, just another human, doing his work without question. He had been assigned to the royal household only a few months ago, his contract signed under the most mundane of circumstances. The Queen's palace was one of the largest in the galaxy, and for someone like Elias, it was just a job. It didn't matter that the alien dignitaries looked at him as if he were an insect beneath their feet. It didn't matter that he was the only human among them. Elias was used to being overlooked, used to being nothing more than a shadow. But then there was Liora. He had seen her through the windows before, silent, distant, alone. He wasn't sure why, but she intrigued him. There was something about the way she looked at the stars, something sorrowful in her gaze that pulled at him. He had tried, in his own quiet way, to smile at her as he passed by. But every time, she had turned her head or looked away as if afraid to acknowledge him. Today, however, as Elias mopped the hallway just outside her room, he noticed her staring out of the window again, her fingers tracing the glass like she was looking for something just beyond it. He couldn't help himself. Without thinking, he stopped, leaned against his mop, and stared up at her. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, but this time, she didn't look away either. For a moment, there was only silence between them, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Elias knew he shouldn't be staring, knew that a janitor like him had no business observing the Queen's daughter, especially when there were so many eyes watching him. But it was as though something was drawing him to her, something far stronger than his need to work. He couldn't place it. Maybe it was the mystery of her silence, the way she seemed so disconnected from the world around her. Or maybe it was the fact that for all her alien beauty and the power of her bloodline, Liora was just another soul trapped in a cage. It reminded him of the way he felt sometimes stuck, invisible, longing for something more. The moment passed, and Liora turned away from the window, retreating into the shadows of the mansion. Elias sighed, resuming his work. He hadn't meant to linger, but it was too late. That quiet curiosity he'd been carrying was now a nagging feeling in his chest, one he couldn't ignore. The human janitor, cleaning the grand hallways of a palace that never seemed to acknowledge him, now found himself wondering if the silence of Liora, the alien queen's daughter, was truly as simple as it seemed, or if it was hiding something much deeper. The next few days were a blur of sweeping, mopping, and polishing. Elias went about his tasks with his usual focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Liora. He had caught fleeting glimpses of her, still silent, still withdrawn, but there was something in her presence that lingered in the air, like a question left unanswered. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the world let on. It was late one evening when the encounter happened. The mansion was quieter than usual. The guests and delegates had all retired to their chambers, leaving only the soft hum of the palace's systems in the background. Elias was finishing his shift, the floors gleaming under the soft light of the holographic chandeliers. As he made his way toward the back hall to grab his mop and bucket, he noticed the familiar figure of Liora standing at the end of the corridor. She wasn't looking at him this time. Instead, her attention was fixed on the stars outside the massive bay window that stretched across the entire wall. Her face was soft in the moonlight, her eyes distant, lost in something only she could see. Elias hesitated, not wanting to intrude on her solitude, but unable to look away. It was as though there was an invisible pull drawing him toward her. He took a step forward, then another, and before he knew it, he was standing just a few feet away from her. She didn't acknowledge him at first, but he wasn't surprised. She never did. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do or say. The silence between them was thick, heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful in a way. Finally, unable to resist the urge, Elias spoke, his voice quiet but genuine. "Why do you stare at the stars?" he asked softly, almost as if he were asking himself. For a long time, there was no response. Elias thought maybe she hadn't heard him, or maybe she simply couldn't speak. But then, her voice, fragile, quiet, cut through the silence like a whisper on the wind. "Because they never speak back." Her words were like a spark in the darkness, a light flickering into existence after years of nothing. Elias blinked, shocked, but then something else hit him. There was sadness in her voice, a depth of emotion that he hadn't expected. He had thought she was simply silent because she was mute, but now he realized there was so much more behind that silence. "Do you wish they would?" Elias asked, stepping a little closer, careful not to overstep. Liora's eyes flickered to him, just for a moment, before returning to the stars. Her face was unreadable, but Elias saw the faintest trace of a tear glistening on her cheek. "Yes," she whispered, "but I don't think they can." The words hung in the air between them, a confession, an invitation to understand something far deeper than the silence that defined her. Elias stood there, feeling as though he had uncovered a small but crucial piece of her world. He didn't know what this moment meant, but he knew one thing. Something had shifted. The days following that encounter were filled with a strange tension. Elias couldn't stop thinking about Liora, her quiet voice, the sadness in her eyes, the way she seemed so distant from everything, even the stars that she gazed at with longing. He found himself watching her more often than he should, wondering about the depth of her silence. One evening, as Elias passed the corridor leading to the bay window, he saw Liora again. This time, she wasn't standing at the window, staring into the void of space. She was sitting on one of the plush benches, her hands folded in her lap. She appeared lost in thought, her face slightly tilted toward the dim light that filtered in from the hallway. For a moment, Elias debated whether he should walk on by, as he always did. But this time, he didn't. Something inside him felt compelled to speak to her again, to try once more to bridge the distance between them. As he approached her, Liora's eyes flicked to him, but she didn't move. There was no shock or fear in her gaze, just the same quiet curiosity. She was waiting for something. Elias stopped a few feet away, unsure of how to begin. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke, his voice tentative but steady. "Do you ever wonder why you're here?" he asked softly. "Why you're trapped in this mansion with all this silence?" Liora's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Elias thought she might leave, might retreat into herself again. But she didn't. She stayed still, her gaze unwavering as she considered his question. "I don't know why I'm here," she answered after a long pause. Her voice was low, almost as if the words were foreign to her. "I've never been anywhere else." Elias took a step closer, drawn in by her vulnerability. "But don't you want to be free, to speak, to live outside these walls?" Liora hesitated. The question seemed to stir something in her, something buried deep, something she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. Her hands tightened in her lap, the first sign of tension Elias had seen in her since they began speaking. "I want to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I can't." Elias's heart ached for her, understanding the weight behind her words. He knew what it felt like to be stuck, to feel like there was no way out. And yet, here she was, the daughter of the most powerful alien queen in the galaxy, held prisoner by something she couldn't control. "Why?" he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Why can't you?" Liora's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. For a moment, she seemed lost in the depths of her own thoughts. Finally, she lifted her eyes to meet his again. "Because if I speak, I could destroy everything," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been told that silence is my only protection, that it keeps me safe. If I break it, the consequences would be too great." The words hung in the air, heavy with an unseen burden. Elias didn't know what to say. He had no answers for her, only questions, only uncertainty. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. Liora's silence was not just a matter of speech, it was a prison. And somehow, Elias had found a way to unlock the door. Days passed in the mansion with the weight of an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Elias couldn't stop thinking about Liora. Her quiet words, her fragile voice, and the look in her eyes haunted him. The more he worked, the more he wondered if there was more to her silence, something deeper than anyone had ever guessed. It was late one evening, as he mopped the grand hallway, that he saw her again. This time, she wasn't by the window, staring at the stars. She was sitting on the edge of a low bench, her hands folded in her lap. Elias couldn't help but notice how different she seemed today. There was a subtle change in her, like the calm before a storm, a stillness that suggested something was about to break free. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether he should approach or leave her in peace. But something inside him urged him forward, as if he was meant to be here in this moment. "Liora," Elias said softly, his voice barely a whisper. Her eyes flickered to him, meeting his gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as though the words had been locked away for too long, Liora's lips parted. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice shaky, uncertain. Elias stepped closer, his heart racing. "You don't have to know, just try." She hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. The silence stretched, thick with her unspoken fear. Elias could see the struggle in her eyes, the desire to speak, to finally be heard, and the terror of what that might unleash. "I'm afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid of what will happen if I speak, if I break the silence." Elias knelt beside her, looking into her eyes with a gentle, reassuring gaze. "Whatever happens, you're not alone," he whispered. "I'm here." Liora's breath hitched as she looked at him, her chest rising and falling with emotion. She closed her eyes, and for a long moment, the room was still. Then, with a faint but unmistakable tremor in her voice, she spoke the words that would change everything. "I think I'm ready." The words were soft, fragile, but in them, Elias heard a quiet strength. He didn't know what would happen next, but in that instant, something had shifted between them. The silence that had imprisoned Liora for so long was beginning to crack, and for the first time she was ready to speak. The next morning, the Queen summoned Elias to the main hall. The grandeur of the room, with its towering arches and alien tapestries, felt colder today. The usual warmth of the palace seemed absent, replaced by a tense air that Elias couldn't shake. He stood before Queen Nyx, her alien features sharp and regal. The Queen's eyes, like twin shards of ice, never left him as she spoke. "You've done something dangerous, human," she said, her voice a low, controlled hiss. "Do you realize what you've done?" Elias swallowed, his pulse quickening. He had expected a reprimand, but the Queen's words were colder than he had anticipated. The weight of her gaze felt like a physical force pressing against him. I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just asked her a question." The Queen's lip curled into a thin smile, one devoid of warmth. "A question that has broken the delicate balance we've maintained for years. Liora's silence is not a mere condition, it is her protection, a protection you have endangered." Elias didn't understand. He had sensed something within Liora, a potential waiting to be unlocked, but he hadn't known that her silence was a weapon, a shield. He glanced down at his hands, unsure of what to say next. "I never meant to hurt her," he said, the words sounding too small in the face of her wrath. The Queen took a step forward, her presence overwhelming. "Then you do not understand the power you've awakened. You are a servant, human. Know your place." Elias stood his ground, though his knees shook beneath him. He had spent his life as a janitor, invisible to everyone until now. The Queen was right. He was a servant, but he was also something more, and he knew it. His connection with Liora wasn't just a mistake, it was the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. "Liora deserves more than silence," Elias said, his voice steady now, despite the fear coiling in his chest. "She deserves a choice." The Queen's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "You think you know what's best for her?" she sneered. "You are nothing, just a cleaning tool. You will remain in your place. Do not forget that." Elias knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't regret it. The Queen's anger was palpable, but the seed of change had already been planted. He had asked the question that had given Liora a voice, and nothing could take that back. As he left the Queen's presence, the weight of the encounter pressed heavily on him. The Queen's wrath would not be easily forgotten, and neither would the silence that Liora had broken. Elias wasn't sure what was to come, but he knew one thing for certain: there was no going back now. The Queen's wrath lingered over Elias like a dark cloud, and the weight of her threat grew heavier each day. He could feel the tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Yet, despite the Queen's anger, something inside him refused to retreat. He had seen Liora's potential, her quiet strength, and he knew he couldn't turn back now. One evening, as Elias was cleaning the royal archives, he found himself drawn to a small, hidden corner of the mansion. It was a place most people avoided, a storage room filled with forgotten relics and ancient records. He had never been instructed to clean it, but tonight, something pulled him there, a quiet urge he couldn't ignore. Inside the room, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old leather. Shelves lined the walls, piled high with scrolls and artifacts from long-forgotten civilizations. It was here, hidden in the shadows, that Elias uncovered a sealed box. The lock was old, covered in intricate symbols he didn't recognize, but there was something about it that called to him. Without thinking, he reached for it, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the box. As soon as he touched it, a strange hum filled the air, as if the box had been waiting for him to open it. With a soft click, the lock gave way, and Elias lifted the lid. Inside, he found a set of ancient texts, their pages yellowed with age. He carefully unrolled one, revealing symbols that seemed familiar yet foreign. They were the same markings he had seen Liora trace on the marble floor the day she spoke for the first time. The realization hit him like a wave. These weren't just ancient texts, they were connected to Liora, to her silence, and to the power that had been hidden inside her. As Elias skimmed through the scroll, the words became clearer. It was a record of a forgotten history, one that spoke of the Meridian Custodians, a lineage of guardians entrusted with guarding an ancient power, one that could change the course of the galaxy. The Queen, it seemed, was not only hiding Liora's voice, but also a secret, that could shatter everything. The more Elias read, the more he understood. Liora's silence wasn't just a form of protection, it was a control mechanism, a way to keep her from accessing powers that could reshape the universe. But why? What had the Queen done to keep Liora in the dark? What was so dangerous about her speaking the truth? Before he could absorb more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Elias quickly shoved the scroll back into the box, the weight of the discovery heavy in his hands. The truth about Liora's silence was now clear, but so was the danger that surrounded it. As he rushed to leave the room, a shiver ran down his spine. He knew he had just uncovered something forbidden, something that could change everything. But the question still haunted him. Would Liora be ready to face the truth? Elias couldn't sleep that night. The weight of the discovery in the archives pressed on him, every detail of the ancient texts swirling in his mind. He now knew the truth about Liora's silence and the dangerous power that lay dormant within her. It wasn't just a curse, it was a deliberate suppression, a shield forged by the Queen to protect not only Liora, but also the throne itself. The next morning, as Elias cleaned the grand hall, his thoughts were consumed by the choices before him. He couldn't ignore what he had learned, but how could he tell Liora? How could he explain that her silence had been imposed upon her, that her voice had been silenced for the sake of something much darker than her own protection? The sound of footsteps broke his reverie, and Elias turned to see Liora standing in the doorway of the hall. She was alone today, her usual guards nowhere in sight. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a quiet understanding between them, something that had grown since that first moment of connection. Elias stepped forward, his heart beating faster. "Liora," he said softly, "I have something to tell you." She raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady but curious. She had started to trust him, but there was still hesitation in her movements, as if waiting for something, a signal perhaps that it was safe to listen. He hesitated. "I've learned something about your silence. It's not just something that happened to you. It was done to you." Her eyes widened slightly, and Elias could see the flicker of recognition in them, but it was quickly replaced by uncertainty. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Elias took a deep breath. He couldn't sugarcoat it. "You were silenced, Liora. Not because of a curse, but because your mother, because the Queen chose to control you. She kept you quiet to prevent you from tapping into powers that could change everything. Powers that were passed down through your bloodline, powers tied to the Meridian custodians." Liora recoiled slightly, as if the words had struck her like a blow. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true. My silence. It's all I've known." "I know," Elias said softly, "but it's not the whole truth, and now you have a choice to make. You can stay silent, safe in the life you've known, or you can speak and risk everything. But if you do, you'll be free, and the galaxy will never be the same." For a long moment, Liora said nothing. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable. The weight of her choice hung heavy between them. Would she break the silence that had been her prison for so long? Or would she choose to live in the shadows, hiding from the power that was rightfully hers? Elias didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. The future of everything, her future, his future, was about to change. The silence between Elias and Liora stretched long, thick with unspoken words and emotions neither could fully express. Her gaze drifted downward, and for a moment, Elias thought she might retreat back into the shell of silence that had kept her safe for so long. But then, her fingers twitched at her side, and she took a step forward, her breath shaky but determined. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice fragile, like a seed just beginning to sprout. "What if I destroy everything? What if the power inside me is too much?" Elias reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You've carried this weight alone for so long, but you don't have to anymore. You don't have to be afraid of who you are or what you can become." Liora's eyes met his, the uncertainty still lingering in their depths, but something else had appeared there as well. A flicker of courage, however small, was beginning to rise. She wasn't just seeing the possibility of freedom, she was beginning to feel it. Elias squeezed her hand. "You have a right to your voice, Liora. A right to make your own choices. The silence. It's not you. It's a cage. For a moment, Liora stood still, as though contemplating the enormity of what was about to happen. She had spent her entire life in the dark, silenced by the very people who were supposed to protect her. To break free now would mean stepping into a world of uncertainty, of danger, but she had spent too long hidden in the shadows. Taking a deep breath, Liora closed her eyes. She could feel it, the power within her, the words that had always been there but never spoken. The chains that bound her were not just physical but psychological. They were the expectations of her mother, the queen, who had kept her silent to control her destiny. And now, those chains were ready to break. When she opened her eyes, she felt different. The weight of the years of silence seemed to lift from her shoulders. She raised her chin, a quiet strength radiating from her as she looked directly at Elias. "I'm ready," she whispered, and then Liora did something that shocked them both. She opened her mouth and, for the first time in her life, she spoke a word, one single word, a word that had been locked away for far too long. "Help." The room seemed to hold its breath as the word echoed in the air between them. It wasn't loud, nor was it dramatic, but for Liora, it was everything. The simple act of speaking had unlocked something within her, a power she had kept hidden for years. Elias, his heart racing, nodded. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help you. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." And in that moment, the chains that had held Liora captive for so long began to break. The air was thick with anticipation as Elias and Liora stood together in the quiet hall. The moment Liora had spoken no, chosen to break her silence, everything had shifted. It was as though the universe itself had taken a collective breath, holding it, waiting to see what would happen next. Liora's newfound voice was still raw, fragile, but it was real. It was hers. And for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. Elias watched her closely, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known that Liora had the power to change everything, but he hadn't realized just how much she had been holding back, how much the silence had been a cage, not just for her, but for the galaxy itself. "I can feel it," Liora said, her voice steadying with each passing second. "The power, the words, they're not just words, they're part of me." Elias nodded, understanding. "They've always been a part of you. You just needed to give yourself permission to speak them." But as she spoke, something else shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle ripple of energy that no one could ignore. The moment of liberation felt charged, like a spark about to ignite something far greater. The queen would know. She would sense it. Liora's gaze hardened. "I need to face her," she said, her voice now filled with a new kind of resolve. "I need to confront my mother." Elias hesitated, his heart clenching at the thought. The queen was dangerous, a ruthless ruler who had done everything to control Liora's every move. But he knew that Liora had already taken the first step toward her freedom. She couldn't turn back now. "I'll be with you," he said, his voice unwavering. Together, they made their way to the queen's chambers, where the grand doors loomed before them like a towering wall. Inside, the queen sat on her throne, her alien form radiating authority, as if the universe itself bent to her will. When she saw them, her eyes flashed with fury. "You," she spat, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've unleashed something that cannot be contained." Liora stepped forward, her voice steady. "You took my voice, you took my power. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not your prisoner." The queen's gaze flickered briefly, something like a storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. "You think you can defy me?" she hissed. Liora met her mother's gaze without fear. "I think I can change everything." A long silence stretched between them, charged with tension. The queen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. And then, finally, she stood from her throne, her expression unreadable. "This is not the end," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You've awakened something that will change the galaxy, Liora. But be careful. Not everyone will welcome what you bring." But Liora didn't flinch. She stood tall, her power no longer hidden, her voice no longer silenced. As they walked out of the chamber, Elias by her side, Liora looked up at the stars through the mansion's towering windows. The silence that had once been her prison was gone, and for the first time, she could see the universe not through a cage, but with her own eyes, her own voice, her own destiny. The galaxy was wide, and it was hers to shape.